The wind howled over the rusted spires of the junkyard, carrying with it the acrid sting of ozone and scorched metal. John Hawk. Hawkins squinted into the horizon, eyes narrowed against the amber glare of a dying sun. His coat, patchwork from ballistic fabric and burn-resistant vinyl, fluttered behind him like a forgotten battle flag. Around him stretched a graveyard of forgotten machines, starfighter husks, cargo drones gutted of purpose, engines still faintly humming with residual charge. He learned long ago that silence in places like this was only ever an illusion. Hawk moved with the caution of a man who had once known the price of haste. Every step over corrugated steel or twisted synth frame was measured. His left leg clicked softly with each motion, an antique military prosthetic held together more by ritual maintenance than reliability. The war had taken much from him, blood, comrades, even sleep. But it had given him one thing he valued more than all the metals he'd buried in a coffee tin. Instinct. That instinct now twitched like a live wire beneath his skin. He paused near the fractured hull of what looked like a Sarnathi skimmer, one of the many relics discarded after the Union's retreat from Earth's orbit 2 decades earlier. His hand drifted to the plasma pistol holstered beneath his coat, thumb tracing the safety notch. Something was moving. Not the wind. Not the creak of metal contracting in the heat. Something alive. The noise came again, low, guttural, almost electronic. Not quite a growl, not quite speech. Hawk crouched, easing closer. His boots whispered over dust and debris, the old soldier in him rising from beneath the layers of solitary junk merchant. He peeled back a panel warped from impact, revealing a cavity lined with shattered polyglass and charred mesh. Inside, something shifted. It looked like a large, collapsed sack of black fur at first, matted, wet, glinting faintly with embedded armor scales. Then it moved again, a slow, labored breath heaved through what had once been a proud, powerful chest. 2 blue eyes opened, phosphorescent and too intelligent for comfort. The creature raised its head, bearing rows of serrated teeth. Its 6 limbs twitched, but made no effort to rise or flee. It was either too weak, or it recognized that Hawk posed no immediate threat. "What in the hell are you?" Hawk muttered. The creature blinked once, then settled its head back onto the scorched floor. A low whine, deep and painful, vibrated in its throat. Hawk didn't move. He let the moment stretch, let the weight of it settle into the hollow of his chest. He recognized the shape of it. The wounded, the discarded, the betrayed. He'd seen the same look in the mirror after the Arcadia Accord was signed, and the soldiers were left to rot in the ruins they bled for. A part of him said, "Walk away. Let nature handle what war had broken." It wasn't his problem. It wasn't even human. But another part, the one that still buried dog tags and rows behind his workshop, moved him forward. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small ration tin. Prying it open revealed a slab of preserved protein cake, bland and dense. He tossed it into the cavity. The creature didn't lunge. It didn't snarl. It simply opened its jaw and let the food fall in, chewing slowly, like it was unsure if this was reality or some cruel hallucination. "Well, you're ugly as hell," Hawk muttered, crouching closer. "But I've seen worse things crawl out of the void." He scanned the creature more closely. Beneath the grime and singed fur, he saw signs of design, implanted filaments, reinforced skeletal hinges, low-light ocular lenses. This wasn't just some alien animal. It was built, engineered, something made for war, then cast aside when the mission changed. "I know that trick," he whispered. The creature tried to lift itself, but its front right limb gave out with a dull thud. It whimpered, frustrated, ashamed. "Easy," Hawk said, rising. "You're not going anywhere like that." He fetched his salvage cart, retrofitted with suspension shocks and a hover assist module. With effort, he eased the creature onto the platform, using a tarp to cover it from the sky-scanning eyes of orbiting drones. If anyone was looking for it, and he had a gnawing feeling someone would be, they'd see nothing more than old scrap and cloth. The journey back to his living quarters was slow. Every bump made the creature grunt, a choked noise like machinery struggling to restart. Hawk felt each sound in his bones. His compound was a half-submerged hangar built into a rocky outcrop, reinforced with scrap plating and shielded by an old Union jamming field. The perfect place for a man trying to be forgotten. And now, perhaps, the perfect place for a creature abandoned by even grander ambitions. Inside, the temperature dropped to a bearable level. He guided the cart into the med bay, such as it was, a converted cargo module lined with expired stems, regrowth gels, and tools more suited to fixing drones than flesh. Still, he worked. He cleaned wounds, sterilized gashes, and used his last ampoule of nanite foam on the creature's worst injuries. It lay still, silent, watching him with those unsettling blue eyes. It didn't flinch when he stitched. It didn't growl when he cut away necrotic tissue. It simply watched, as if trying to learn something unspoken. Hawk could feel its mind working, even if it didn't speak. There was an intensity behind those eyes, a mind too fractured to communicate, yet too aware to dismiss. He'd seen that look on rookies in the med tents, the ones who'd survived ambushes, stranded in the black between worlds. After 2 hours of work, Hawk finally slumped into a chair across the room. Sweat ran down his temple. His prosthetic hissed and whined as he adjusted his weight. Well, he muttered, if you die tonight, at least you'll die clean. The creature stirred. It tried to raise its head again, succeeded halfway, and locked eyes with him. This time, it didn't look like a beast. It looked like someone waiting for permission to live. Hawk exhaled slowly. You got a name? Guess not. You don't talk much. He rubbed his chin, fingers tracing the scar beneath his jaw. All right then. I'll give you one. Garash. The creature blinked slowly. Means shadow that watches, or something like it. Learned it from a Sarnathi translator during the siege. Fitting. Outside, the wind rose again. A sheet of metal clanged loose and fell somewhere deep in the yard, but Hawk didn't move. He watched Garash drift into a dreamless sleep, breath evening out, chest rising and falling in a rhythm that fell quieter. Less desperate. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel so heavy. He didn't know what the creature was, not really. But he knew one thing already. Something had changed. Garash healed slowly, but he healed. Hawk monitored the process with a mechanic's pragmatism and a soldier's vigilance. Days bled together in the filtered light of the junkyard, where sunrise meant another inventory scan and sunset brought rust-colored shadows across the steel bones of the past. The black-furred aliens slept often, each rest deeper than the last. Hawk kept his routine unchanged. He didn't believe in coddling. He salvaged, repaired, cooked, and cleaned, all while the creature rested in a converted cargo bay warmed by recycled heat coils and insulated with discarded fabric. Every morning, Hawk checked the wounds. The nanite foam had worked miracles on some, knitting torn flesh and binding broken capillaries, but others required dressing, careful cleaning, and quiet patience. The alien never resisted. It watched him with calm intelligence, like a veteran enduring field treatment. Hawk recognized the look, pain acknowledged but ignored. That, more than anything, made him uneasy. This thing understood suffering. It wasn't instinct driving its compliance. It was discipline. One afternoon, Hawk found the creature standing on 3 legs, the 4th still bound in bandages. It didn't growl, didn't bare its teeth. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, something between a nod and a bow. Hawk, startled by the gesture's civility, said nothing for a moment. All right, he finally muttered, you're up. Let's see what else you're hiding. He fetched a bowl of warm protein broth and placed it on the floor. Garash leaned down, sniffed it, and lapped it carefully. Its movements were precise, deliberate, not animalistic. This thing had once known ritual, perhaps even command. Hawk leaned against the wall, arms crossed, analyzing the creature's form again. Muscles coiled beneath the sleek, ugly fur. Not bred for speed but power. The segmented armor plates weren't decorative. They were grown, likely designed to deflect energy rounds and resist atmosphere scrapes. Even injured, it radiated a sense of purpose. You were made to fight, Hawk said aloud. A war dog, bio-forged and left behind. Garash's ears twitched at the word dog, but it didn't react otherwise. Hawk watched it for a while, searching for cues. Eventually, he sighed and turned away, walking toward his workbench. He spent the next few hours repairing a servo arm from a mining rig, the whine of tools punctuating the silence. Every so often, he glanced back. Garash hadn't moved, just stared at him, head tilted slightly. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the junkyard in bruised orange, Hawk sat outside with a ration tin and a harmonica. He didn't play well, never had, but the notes floated through the air with a broken kind of hope. He used to play for his squad, back when downtime was rare and silence meant danger. Now it was habit, maybe even comfort. To his surprise, Garash padded out of the shelter and settled near the door, curling into a half-alert crouch. "You like that?" Hawk asked, lowering the harmonica. "Not exactly Galactic Symphony stuff, but it passes the time." Garash made a low sound, not a growl, more like a humming rumble from deep in its chest. Not hostile, maybe even appreciative. Hawk nodded. They repeated the ritual over the next few days. Mornings brought cautious walks through the junkyard perimeter. Afternoons were for tending wounds, checking supplies, patching leaks in the shielding net. Evenings came with harmonica music and quiet companionship. The creature learned Hawk's rhythms. Hawk, in turn, began to understand Garash's. He noticed how Garash examined tools, sniffed old fusion cells, and growled softly at dead transmitter towers. Not curiosity for its own sake, recognition. This creature had seen these things before, lived among them, perhaps even used them. Hawk caught himself thinking of Garash, less like an animal, and more like a stranded comrade. On the fifth night, something changed. Hawk was working under a console when a surge of light filled the room. He rolled out quickly, reaching for his pistol, but froze as he saw Garash standing before the bench, its collar projecting a hazy blue holographic field. Data symbols spun slowly, some in alien scripts, others in standard Union protocol. A language bridge interface. "Where the hell did you get that running?" Hawk whispered. The collar hummed again. One of the symbols pulsed. Hawk recognized it. Memory archive. The device wanted to share something. He hesitated, then tapped the command with a gloved finger. The air shifted. Suddenly, images swirled around him. Memories, not his own. Troop formations, deep space dropships, fire raining from orbit. Garash, leading others like itself through war-scarred valleys lit by moons and energy beams. Screams, orders, strategy, nodes flashing. Then, the betrayal. Retreat orders. Garash's unit left behind to cover the evacuation. The last moments showed Garash fighting, bleeding, retreating deeper into wreckage. And then silence. Darkness. Hawk staggered back. The projection faded. "You were one of theirs. Not a pet. A soldier," he murmured. Garash stood silently, eyes never leaving his. "They made you. Used you. And when it got bad, they left you." A low rumble answered. Not angry. Affirming. Hawk sat down, the weight of it all settling on his shoulders. He stared at the floor for a long time. "You and I," he said softly, "we've got more in common than I thought." Garash approached, slowly, and sat beside him. For a moment, neither moved. The next morning, they worked together. Hawk retrieved an old diagnostic rig, originally meant for early-gen combat synths. It took hours, but with Garash's cooperation, they rigged a basic interface. Garash's collar, now fully online, translated pulses of meaning. Not quite speech, but close. "Thank you." Hawk blinked at the screen. "You're welcome." Not done. Danger. Watching. That stopped Hawk cold. Who's watching? Garash's collar bust. Static. Then a flicker of a red Union insignia, fractured and corrupted. Hawk's voice dropped. "They're looking for you." Garash turned toward the east, toward the sky that used to burn with Union fleets. Its tail swayed once, slow and deliberate. "Then we better make sure they don't find you first," Hawk said. He walked toward the storeroom and began pulling tarps off old gear. Signal jammers, field dampeners, a rusted but intact orbital scan deflector. Garash followed, silently watching. There was no more ambiguity now. No illusion of a quiet retirement or an alien pet he'd nursed back to health and forget about. Something was coming. The war he thought he'd outlived was stirring again. Not out there in the void, but here, in the dust and bones of a forgotten yard. And this time, he wasn't alone. The wind carried a different scent now. Charged, electric, laced with the sharp tang of ozone and something deeper. Threat. Hawk felt it long before the scanners registered anything. He stood in the yard at dawn, one hand on the edge of a rusted transport shell, watching the horizon like it had personally wronged him. Garash was beside him, crouched low, armored plates catching the orange light as he sniffed the air with precision. The creature had fully recovered, at least physically, and no longer moved like something wounded. Now he moved like what he was built to be, a weapon tempered by experience. For 3 days, they had fortified the perimeter. Hawk had torn apart his best salvage to construct a makeshift shield array, cobbling together enough coherent dampeners to fool low-orbit recon scans. Garash had scouted blind spots in the yard's maze of debris, identifying approach vectors, bottlenecks, and kill zones. Their coordination didn't require speech. A glance, a gesture, or a short data ping from Garash's collar sufficed. They worked like soldiers long deployed together, bound by necessity and sharpened by silent trust. Then the signal came. Hawk was calibrating a motion sensor when the static buzzed through his comms. A faint flicker, buried under layers of white noise, pierced the jamming field just long enough to transmit a fragment of Union protocol. Not a distress call, not a warning. A locator ping, target acquisition confirmed. They found Garash. Hawk shut down the comms and slid the panel closed, his fingers steady even as his pulse surged. He crossed the yard to where Garash perched atop a half-buried skiff, surveying the wasteland beyond. The alien looked up as Hawk approached, his eyes glowing faintly beneath his brow ridges. "They know," Hawk said. "They're coming." Garash's collar flickered. "I will go. Draw them off." "No," Hawk answered firmly. "You won't. I was left before. I do not wish for you to be left too." Hawk shook his head, jaw clenched. "I already fought their war. They used us both. What they want now isn't justice or cleanup, it's control. You're a loose end. You think they'll let anyone near you live after this?" Garash made a low sound, almost a sigh, then leapt down beside him. His bulk landed with the grace of a trained predator, but Hawk didn't flinch. They stood side by side, veterans of forgotten battles, now preparing for one more. That night, the sky bloomed with silent thunder. Atmosphere breaks fired as drop craft descended in tight formation. No overt fanfare, no spotlights. The Union didn't need intimidation anymore. They expected easy kills. Hawk watched them from his monitor array, chewing a dried strip of meat as if this were just another day's salvaging. He tapped into the old tactical grid he'd installed back when paranoia was his only companion. 5 craft, staggered approach, drone deployment confirmed. Probably 1 recon unit, 3 sweeper squads, and a command asset, maybe AI-driven, maybe flesh and blood. Either way, he wasn't planning to make it easy. "We got 10 minutes, Hawk muttered. Garash was already gone, melting into the shadows of the yard. Hawk smiled grimly and grabbed his rifle. Not standard issue, an old kinetic thrower he'd modified to punch through light armor. He slung it over his shoulder and donned his war-scarred exo vest. Not much protection, but it would give him a few extra seconds where it counted. The first drone crested the ridge like a silent vulture. Hawk raised his weapon and dropped it with a single shot to the core. The explosion was brief, contained, but it lit the yard in flickering amber. That was the starting gun. Boots crunched gravel. Figures in matte gray armor filtered through the outer debris field, weapons ready. They moved like professionals, tight formation, covered discipline, Neuralink reflexes. But they didn't know the terrain like Hawk did. He watched from his perch near the old shuttle wreck and triggered the first trap, a collapsed girder rigged with a concussive charge. It slammed down with a shriek of tortured metal, scattering the lead fire team and burying 2 of them beneath 4 tons of steel. Garash struck the second squad like a living missile. He erupted from beneath a half-sunken drone chassis, claws slicing, teeth bared. The Union soldiers didn't even scream before he tore through them, a blur of violence honed into purpose. Hawk had seen death delivered in many ways, but Garash moved with something else, rage tempered by sorrow. A statement, not a slaughter. Hawk moved fast, repositioning through narrow alleys of wreckage. He picked off stragglers, disoriented by the terrain. Pulse rounds slammed into the dirt near his feet, but he ducked behind a rusted fuel cell and returned fire, dropping a flanker who tried to circle him. Sweat stung his eyes, but his aim never wavered. Then came the command unit. It descended at the yard center, a sleek, mantis-like mech with a glassy canopy and twin plasma turrets. Hawk swore under his breath. That wasn't standard Union gear. That was a prototype. They hadn't just come to erase a rogue asset. They'd come to test their new toys. Garash! Hawk barked into his comm, diving as the turret spun and fired a beam that scorched the dirt where he'd stood seconds before. Garash responded with a feral roar and leapt onto the mech's back. His claws tore into the armor, sparks flying. The machine bucked, twisted, and slammed into a girder, but Garash held on, biting through exposed cabling and ripping out chunks of hardware. Hawk didn't wait. He sprinted through the chaos, ducking under a fallen beam and scaling the rear platform of a salvage crane. From there, he had a clean shot at the mech's exposed core. He squeezed the trigger. The kinetic round punched through the side of the canopy, shattering its interface. The machine twitched, then erupted in a gout of fire as its power source went critical. Garash hurled himself free, landing in a roll beside Hawk as the explosion lit the yard in raw orange light. Smoke curled around them. The last of the Union squads were either retreating or already down. Hawk leaned against the railing, panting, ears ringing. Garash stood beside him, bloodied, breathing hard but steady. They watched the wreckage burn together. After a long silence, Hawk finally spoke. "They'll send more." Garash nodded, his collar pulsing once. "Yes." Hawk looked up at the stars, distant, silent, uncaring. "But they'll know this place isn't undefended anymore." Garash rumbled quietly. "Then we defend it." Hawk turned to him, a tired grin tugging at his lips. "Welcome home, soldier." Garash inclined his head. For now, the wind was quiet. The fire crackled through the junk, and the sky above held no threat. But both of them knew this was only the beginning, and neither of them would run. Ash drifted across the yard like snow, settling into the crevices of old hulls and scorched machinery. The battle was over, but the junkyard had changed. It no longer resembled a forgotten grave of metal and ruin. It felt like a fortress, one forged through fire and purpose. Hawk walked through the debris with a limp in his left knee, the result of a glancing pulse round. He hadn't bothered patching it beyond a brace. Pain was a language he understood, one he respected. It kept him alert. Garash was already moving, his massive form quiet and calculating. He stalked the perimeter with a soldier's instinct, pausing at impact sites, inspecting the fallen. The Union had underestimated him, underestimated them both. That error would not be repeated. They'd buried the bodies, Hawk insisting on it more than Garash. Not for sentiment, but for principle. Even soldiers who followed the wrong command deserved the dignity of the ground. He had dug the graves himself, one slow motion at a time, while Garash stood vigil with those fierce, unblinking eyes. Now silence ruled, the kind that wasn't empty, but earned. Back inside the converted command shack, Hawk sat at his terminal, a battered relic now revived with newer processors scavenged from downed drones. A map of the system blinked quietly on screen. Scans showed minor fluctuations in orbital drift and increased patrol activity near the outer belt. They were watching, waiting, preparing their next move. "They'll escalate," Hawk muttered, tapping the edge of the screen. "Send better equipment. Smarter commanders. Maybe even old friends." Garash entered, ducking beneath the low doorframe. His wounds had scabbed over, skin knitting tightly along his ribs and shoulder. His collar lit up, and a brief message flickered into being on the wall display. "I know them. They're patterns. I was part of it." "You were more than part of it," Hawk replied. "You were the tip of their spear. Now I am not. Now you're something they don't control, and that terrifies them." Garash let the message fade. He stepped forward and placed a single object on the table, an old Union rank medallion, torn from one of the fallen officers. Hawk stared at it. The insignia was marked with a blood smear and deep scratches. It was not a trophy. It was a warning. "They'll come looking for this," Hawk said. "Let them." They spent the next few days building. The yard transformed into a maze of defensive layers, not brute force, but intelligence. Trip sensors disguised as debris, anti-drone fields hacked from enemy gear, sonic disruptors calibrated to scramble targeting optics. Garash suggested most of the configurations. Hawk executed them with practiced hands. It wasn't about surviving the next attack. It was about ensuring this place, this alliance, stood as something no longer disposable. During those long hours of labor, Hawk found himself speaking more. Not just to give instructions, but to share. Old stories. Lost battles. Names no one remembered anymore. Garash listened. Sometimes he responded, a gesture, a phrase from the collar, or a small, knowing sound. He wasn't just a war machine. He had memory. Maybe not like humans did, but in ways that mattered. "I remember Demeter Ridge," Hawk said one night, watching the stars from the roof of a fractured shuttle core. "Lost 40 men in a single pass. High Command never acknowledged it, just listed the site as an equipment failure." Garash's voice came through softly. "They do not mourn what they cannot control." "No, they don't. But I do." Silence stretched again, this time companionable. Two beings forged in war, remade in its aftermath, bound not by orders but by choice. Then came the message. It arrived through a corrupted satellite feed, camouflaged as static but embedded with data that Hawk's terminal recognized instantly. Union High Command encrypted broadcast. He decrypted it in under an hour, pulse tightening with every line of code revealed. They were deploying a reclamation unit. Not just hunters, not just silencers, a full-scale retrieval force. Garash watched him work, head tilting slightly as Hawk's expression darkened. The old soldier stood, crossed the room, and placed a hand against the creature's shoulder. "This isn't a cleanup anymore. They're not coming for one soldier. They're coming for the idea that something they made could walk away, that it could think, choose. Then they must see what that choice becomes." Hawk exhaled slowly, then nodded. They prepared again, but differently now. No more Band-Aid defenses or reactive traps. They built a message into the bones of the yard, a signal of defiance, of memory, of transformation. Hawk rigged a transmitter into the tallest crane arm, not to send coordinates, but to project a loop of their stand. Video, sensor logs, even Garash's recorded memories. "If they kill us," Hawk said, locking the final circuit into place, "this goes out to every frequency they thought they controlled. Every ship, every colony, every dirt farm radio." Garash stood tall beside him. "And we do not die quietly." The wait was shorter than expected. The sky darkened at noon with the shadow of their descent. This time, not sleek dropships, but a command cruiser overhead, projecting power through sheer scale. Mechs, drones, and foot soldiers flooded from the underbelly, disciplined and many. The yard lit with alarms. Hawk strapped on his gear. Garash snarled low and fierce. They fought again, but it wasn't like before. This time, it wasn't a desperate defense. It was an assertion. Every strike, every trap, every feint carried meaning. Hawk moved like a ghost through the wreckage, delivering precise shots that disrupted formations. Garash roared through enemy lines, not as a mindless beast, but as a force of deliberate resistance. They weren't trying to win. They were proving a point. The yard held longer than any projection would have allowed. But inevitability has a weight. Near the end, Hawk was pinned, plasma burned across his side, rifle jammed. Garash was cornered by two mechs, his armor cracked, limbs bleeding. The signal beacon glowed above them, nearing its final pulse. They locked eyes. Neither spoke. Garash surged forward, tearing through one mech with a dying scream that sounded more defiance than pain. The second struck him down, hard and final. Hawk watched it happen, rage and sorrow boiling inside him. He dragged himself to the control panel, one final keystroke primed. The message activated. The beacon fired. A flash. A wave of data flared across all bands. Hawk's vision faded to white, and then stillness. Time passed. In some distant spaceport, a maintenance tech would pause as a strange broadcast interrupted her feed, footage of a man and an alien side by side, defying the Union. On a frontier planet, a former soldier would recognize the name Hawk on a silent signal and weep. And deep within systems that had long erased such things, the image of Garash, ugly, proud, resolute, would echo again and again. They had not died quietly, and they would not be forgotten.